Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover Podcast. This is, I guess, do we call this the first episode of the new season, or is this still preseason for us?
Our first post summer episode. The first day of fall is yesterday, first day of practice today, so finally starting to feel like it.
Yeah, I think since we've got the banner reveal for the Final Four coming up October 11th, that should be officially closing the book on last year's team and opening the book for this year's team.
Well, I'm your host, Christian Sykes, joined as always by Charles Branch and occasionally now by Joey Blackwell.
It's
Uh,
been a busy summer, what can I say?
um,
No, it seems like every time that there were guests, it was like I was like free the week before and the week after, but the guests were always right when I had something going on. And finally I made family move their schedule for this episode so I could be here.
well, Joey will be on throughout the season. Just summer stuff. We record when we can and we get stuff out when we can. But how you guys doing? How's the summer been? How's life been treating you guys?
Yeah, it's been good. Like I said, very busy. I had a lot of stuff with work, but then past month, me and my wife went on vacation, so that was nice. And it's good to be, back right as fall's starting up. And I went outside to mow the lawn this past weekend. It was the first time that I went outside, where it felt like it was the beginning of fall. Like it was, I think it was 78 degrees, and there was not a lot of humidity. And so I was like, okay. So as soon as you hear, as soon as that, feels like that outside, some basketball's coming up. So, but it's been great. How about you, Charles?
It's been, we have grown up as just this is football season. And even though ourselves, we've looked forward to basketball season, football's been 99% of the focus. And I think with what we have in this year's team, but also some of the recruiting news that came out in the past couple of weeks about getting two additional players for this year's upcoming class. Where everybody's been excited. They've been talking about it since the summer, since the roster was, putting the final touches on it, since Brian Adams was added to the staff, as the game started to trickle out as far as the non-conference that everybody's very, very excited about this year. And Coach Oates, added fuel to that fire at Hey Coach last week, talking about everybody needs to be prepared for a special season. So, it's hard to believe we're less than a month away from an actual game taking place, even if it's an exhibition. But glad that it's right around the corner, and we're going to get to see what this team's made of, and we're going to get to see if everything that we believe with this team is actually going to play out, and it is going to be yet another special season for Alabama basketball. It's hard to believe too that we're stacking all these special seasons back to back to back, and it's not a 30-year gap in between them anymore.
Well, and it's crazy that you mentioned that. I mean, we're recording a podcast on the first day of official practice. It is the 23rd. And this week, Tuscaloosa is buzzing because Alabama's playing Georgia in football. And, we're sitting here recording a podcast about Alabama basketball. Um, and the types of conversations I've had in the off seasons with people just getting excited. We're in a Discord, and I literally all off season have been doing nothing but talk about basketball with people. It hasn't stopped. It's similar to how football normally is around Alabama, and so just getting ready, getting excited. It feels like a month is such a short amount of time, but also so far away. But we're almost there. I think the first game that we have, well, first thing we have, like Charles mentioned, is the Final Four banner reveal, which is October 11th. Um, that one is going to be similar to like a tied tip off, like we've seen in the past. I think there might be like a dunk contest, a 3-point contest, things like that, maybe some giveaways. Um, and then you go to Birmingham and you face Wake Forest, who we faced last year in a not so secret scrimmage. I think that it was a charity exhibition actually, where Alabama had quite a few injuries on on the roster last year going into that game. So you saw a lot of different people play. I think Sam Walters had 29 points or something, um, different things like that. And then you go to Memphis, or not to Memphis. You play Memphis in Huntsville. Again, another charity exhibition. So you're getting two kind of preseason games out of the way against some good Power Five competition. Um, Hopefully, we'll be able to see some stuff from either stats or box scores, different things like that. Um, but what are you guys' thoughts on the preseason games? We tend to not play well in them. I don't think we win very many of them. What do you guys think?
What I've learned over the past few years is that if Alabama's not playing in Europe and it's preseason, then don't take it too seriously. um, I think, like you said, Christian, last year they had a lot of injuries heading in, so it's kind of tough to get a gauge. The year before that was, of course, the European tour where they pretty much decimated everybody with who was it? David Diaz Hernando? Is that who they had? And then, of course, the year before that, also some tough preseason games, but it's just a way for these teams to get together and to face some competition that isn't a practice squad. Obviously, if you're going to these games, you want them to be entertaining, but you have to take these results with a grain of salt because this is like I just said, these teams are playing a new competition for the first time, trying to get that chemistry down, trying to gel as a unit, and also for the coaches trying to figure out what they're still trying to fine tune the lineups, who's going to be the sixth man, seventh, eighth, and who are the starting five. So um, I think Bama has a shot to do a little bit better in those scrimmage games this year than in years past, but I still think that it's not gonna ruin everybody. It shouldn't ruin everybody's weeks if they don't do so hot those first couple of games.
I think it's great that both games are open to the public. Now
Mhm.
there is a nominal fee that you have to pay to get into those games.
I don't know about nominal. There's a fee.
But like starting with the Wake Forest game, playing in Boutwell Auditorium in Birmingham, I think would be a really cool experience for anybody that can go. I know there's only going to be 2,000 tickets available, and that probably alludes to why it is so pricey to get in. In addition to the money that's being raised for that is going to be going to a good cause. But just being in Boutwell Auditorium previously and seeing how they will set that up for putting a basketball court down there and actually having a game there, I think will be a really unique experience. Davin Cosby plays for Wake Forest now, so that should be fun for some of the guys that played with Davin last year to play against him on the court in a game that, again, it won't count on anybody's win-loss record, but hopefully both teams can have a good showing at that game. And then you head up to Huntsville to play Memphis. And again, it may just be Penny Hardaway left on the coaching staff for Memphis right now. I don't know if he's hired any assistants, but the idea of being able to take the Alabama basketball brand on the road within state, I think has been great. That Coach Oates has done that. We've had games up in Huntsville in the Rocket City Classic, played South Alabama down in Mobile. We've obviously had games in Birmingham, and especially with this team and just what you're building to make it a little bit easier from a distance standpoint for some of these people to go watch this team play, to build that excitement. I think it's great that you're going to be able to play in front of Alabama fans those first two games leading into the season. And again, you are going to play against two teams. I know Memphis for sure is projected to be in the NCAA tournament somewhere around an 8-9 seed. Not quite sure where Wake Forest is projected right now, but I would think it's somewhere in that conversation too with who they have returning as well. So you're going to play good competition, which is not a surprise, not only from an exhibition standpoint, but just how Coach Hoach schedules in the non-conference. And I know we'll get into that a little bit, but, good opportunity, like y'all said, to kind of figure out, guys playing with each other. I'm one of the things that I'll be interested to see is just how the young guys fit with some of these new players. And when we were talking to LeBaron, a couple of weeks ago, talked about how he and Darian were on the same AAU team. Well, Darian and Aiden were on the same, high school team. So the familiarity of those guys together, I think, is pretty unique. It'll be interesting to see if they are on a second unit together, how that second unit gels, because they do have a little bit more experience playing with each other than just freshmen coming into the program.
I
Yeah,
just looked up the ticket prices just for the heck of it, and for Boutwell right now, the cheapest ticket's $120 for that game, and that's in the End Zone, as they've designated it on that website. The cheapest ticket for the Rocket City Classic is currently $50. So a little bit better deal if you're up in Huntsville for that one.
Yeah, and speaking of the freshmen, you'll probably see Darian play some type of role early. I've heard some good things out of practice where maybe he gets a little bit more run than what we think. Um, and LeBaron is one of those guys that, similar to like Noah Clowney a couple years ago, where he's getting a lot of hype in the off-season practices, in workouts, different things like that. Aiden is obviously going to be the backup big, I believe. He's going to split those kind of reps with Grant Nelson. And those two are kind of just going to shore up the back end with when Cliff's not playing. So I mean, I would expect him to play a good bit as well. And then you just talk about some of the newcomers coming in, like Aiden Holloway, Cliff Amori, Chris Youngblood, Houston Mallett, Nas Cunningham. Like these guys, when you have to replace Rylan Griffin, when you have to replace Aaron Estrada, you have to replace Sam Walters, Davin Cosby, Chris Parker. Your depth pieces outside of probably Rylan, who would most likely be starting on this team this year. You filled it with guys that have a lot of experience, and if they don't have a lot of experience, have a lot of talent. I went on the Hoop Southbound podcast earlier last week, and I don't envy the staff for trying to have to make minute, in rotations for this team, because it's truthfully 12, 13 guys deep, and we're not going to play a 12, 13 man rotation. It's going to be 8 to 10 most likely. Well, let's get through these first three games that we have to open the season. You have UNC Asheville, you have Arkansas State, and I think the big I wouldn't say home game, but the one that I kind of have circled that I'm interested to see is the McNeese State game in Tuscaloosa, homecoming for Will Wade. I hope we get some FBI jackets in the crowd from either the students, the fans, heckle him, take the money and run type vibes, I'm excited for that one. And then obviously you have Brian Hodgson coming in, Arkansas State head coach. I think we played them last year as well. What are your thoughts on the first three games?
Do you want me to go first, Charles? Okay.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. UNC Asheville, I was doing a little deep dive, as deep as you can get into UNC Asheville. Earlier, they finished 325th in KenPom last year with a 22-12 record. Overall, this is a team it's a really good team for Alabama to kind of just, get that ball rolling after those first couple of charity exhibitions. Once again, kind of in a similar vein with the charity exhibitions, this is, you're still trying to get the team together, trying to figure out, the first unit, second unit, all that fun stuff. Obviously with Arkansas State, a good old Brian Hodgson will be coming back to Tuscaloosa. So, that'll be a good game for Alabama. They are playing in Tuscaloosa. I'm not wrong there, right?
Yeah.
They were one of the most improved teams in the Sun Belt last year. They went 11-7 the year before, 11-7 in non-conference, and 4-14. I think last year they went 20-17. I think so. They did. They showed an improvement. So another good team. We're kind of seeing that slow progression over the first couple of games. And obviously, it's always good to see Brian Hodgson. And, the creme de la creme of those first three games, of course, McNeese State. Last year, they finished, I believe, 30-4. They made the tournament. They were a really solid team last year. Will Wade did a really good job in his first year there. And this is a program that, Nate Oates would say, he would talk about how much, they made the tournament last year and how this isn't a slacker team, and he'd be absolutely right. This is a team that really can sneak up on you, especially with a solid coach like Will Wade. So between those first three games, you have those incremental steps going up until, of course, we're about to talk about Purdue, Illinois, and Houston and all those games I got coming on. But really like these first 3 games as a warm up.
I think with UNC Asheville, it's a basketball program that in their conference typically always finishes top four. It is a one big lead. They're typically competing for that. But they're just not going to have the talent level, the shooting that would really scare me. So I would expect that's a game that you can really run away with, probably in the first half, and really let some of these younger guys new to the system, get a lot more minutes in the second half. And when you look at Arkansas State and you look at McNeese State, we know the type of recruiter that Brian Hodgson is. He does a good job not only with high school guys, but I think Arkansas State did pretty well in the transfer portal. McNeese State, by some opinions, I think put together a team that could be flirting with the top 25, at some point in the year, if not early on in the year, depending on how their season goes. So it's 2 coaches that know the SEC. I could see both of those games be challenging for a half, but I believe our talent level will eventually break those games open. I mean, both teams you could almost slot into a mid to lower tier, maybe SEC team as it relates to talent level. So I think there will be good competition. I think there will be good coaching opportunities, teaching opportunities through both those games. But those are 2 games that I would expect with this team to eventually be able to run away with and take care of business as you head into what is a pretty incredible 7-game stretch that has been put together by Coach Oates and staff.
Well, the big thing about the Brian Hodgson return game is last year they were a game away from the NCAA tournament. They got to the Sun Belt championship game and lost. So, and that was in year 1 for Brian or Coach Hodge. So, what that looks like, what his team looks like, obviously you would expect some improvement, but to be able to flip that program around and be a game away from making the NCAA tournament in year 1 just kind of shows you the quality of coach that he is. And then obviously Will Wade coming in with like a what would you say, like a 30-4 record or something like that. McNeese in his first year. We know Will Wade can coach. I mean, we've seen it throughout the SEC until the FBI investigation kind of shut down, what he was doing, which now is legal in college basketball. So, there's no qualms there, but it will be, I think that's going to be one of those games that people are going to have circled on their schedule just because of the Will Wade, situation with Alabama and the Trendon Watford and, all of that. But I'm really looking forward to that. And then you talk about taking steps up. This is not a step up to the next level. This is just like Nate was like, let's just take an elevator up to the top of the Empire State Building and jump off of it, because that's basically what you're getting in these next, specifically 3 games. But the next, 7 or so games where you have Purdue, Illinois, Houston, Rutgers, who has Dylan Harper, and I think Ace Bailey on that team too.
Yes.
2 5-star players. Notre Dame, who's but then you go North Carolina, Creighton. Like, we know how Nate Oates is going to schedule. We understand that but this year is just like on a completely different stratosphere. To have those 7 games in a row, I feel like I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's talk about the Purdue game. We're playing at Purdue, and I think we have a return game next year. Obviously Purdue loses Zach Edey, but what are you guys' thoughts on, does Purdue take a step back? Do they kind of stay about the same, or do they improve?
I think it's hard to not take a step back when you lose a player like Edey. I mean, the guy was, whether you like him or not, he was a huge, huge part of their team and their success that they had last year. I think they're going to have to rely more on their point guards this year, specifically Braden Smith. I think he averaged around 12 points and 5 to 6 rebounds last year. Smith is going to be a huge factor for them. They also, I think another player that's kind of poised for kind of a breakout year for them is Fletcher Lloyd. He was one of the team's top shooters from deep last year. So I think while it might be a step back, this team is still Purdue. They're still a really, really good team. I think it's, after the game that Bama had against them last year, Tide fans are all too familiar with Purdue now and what they can present. So I'm really excited for this game. I think I'm glad to see that it's being at Purdue instead of in Canada this year, and then we got the game in Coleman next year, so that'll be nice. But no, I'm really looking forward to this game and this stretch, which I'm sure we'll break it down game by game. But really, this will be the first, okay, here we are. And talking about the schedule just really quick, you know, it seems that every year under Oates, it's like, oh, this is the toughest schedule that we've ever had, and it kind of is hard to think, oh, how can the schedule get tougher? And then you talked, Christian, about the steps and then the elevator. I feel like this year is an elevator from last year as far as steps to the tough schedule. So, but no, that's my thoughts on Purdue. How about you, Charles?
It'll be interesting for Purdue because I do feel like this is maybe a little bit of a new era because it's just not just Zach Edey. I mean, I think about Isaac Haas, a kid from Alabama that played at Purdue. Purdue's been known for having at least one guy, if not two at times, that's 7 feet plus, 250, 300 pounds, that can move, that can score. It's not just a body out there that's big, that they can actually play the game of basketball. So, like you said, they're going to have to maybe at least early on rely a little bit more on their guards. So that presents a very interesting guard matchup when we also have guys like a Mark Sears and Aiden Holloway, a Latrell Wrightsell, to go in and match up with their guys. It being a Friday night game too is obviously a benefit to Purdue being on the road up there. That should be a game that a lot of their fans can get to. And when I think of, hostile environments, I would think Mackey Arena is one of those hostile environments just in college basketball. Maybe not a top 10 environment, but it's Indiana basketball. It's people that know the game of basketball. They know these players backwards and forwards. So you're taking a team that, again, all these new players, still trying to get on the same page and stuff like that, and throwing them right into the fire, or throwing them right into the Boilermaker, I guess. Game 4 up in Purdue. So I think it'll be a great test. And I know we're about to hit probably all these games, in a sense, one by one. But when I think about this stretch too of being 7 games, if you want to win a national championship, you got to win 6 games in a row. I'm not putting out expectations that the only way we're going to win a national championship is if we win these, 7 in a row, 6-1. But this is the type of stretch that you typically have to go through to win a national championship. So it's a great early test for this team, as they hopefully will be able to look back at this kind of like maybe how last year's team too, when they played Purdue and Creighton in Arizona. And even though they didn't get the results that they wanted, they knew they could play with the best teams. And that's eventually got over the hump when we got to the Sweet 16, Elite Eight, and got into the Final Four. But not only is it a hard stretch, it starts off tough with a team that's going to be considered at least in the top 20 by a lot of college basketball analysts. I think ESPN currently has Purdue as, in their way too early, top 25 is 16 in the country. Matt Painter's a phenomenal coach. His team will be ready. Their fans will be ready. They'll be very familiar with Cliff. They'll be very familiar with our team, as you mentioned, after we played them in Canada last year. So, I think it's a great early college basketball game, which for college basketball fans in general, during that time of year in November on a Friday night, something you're going to want to sit back and watch.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of last year when we played Purdue, you didn't really have like this inside presence that could handle the likes of like Zach Edey, right? And Alabama did well in that game. I think until like 7 minutes to go, we were leading or something like that. And then it kind of just got out of hand, similar to a lot of games that Alabama played in close, where they were close or leading and just kind of just fell away until you got to the NCAA tournament.
It's actually very similar to the UConn game.
Exactly. Yeah. And now you have Cliff Morey, who, credit to Nick Pringle and Mo Wagi, those guys, and Grant to an extent, but Cliff's a different beast. Alabama had 112 blocks last season. Cliff had 93 by himself. That's the type of player that Alabama needs to have that type of impact defensively that we kind of missed last year. I do know that Purdue did get a 7'3" freshman. I don't know how much he's going to play, but you talk about recruiting those big
His name
guys.
like Yak Zedi or something?
I'll have to find his name, but yeah, I was like, of course they've got a 7'3" guy coming in right when Zach Edey leaves. Like, they only recruit one every 4 years, but it's
4 more years. 4 more years.
Well, moving on, you go to the Illinois game, which is in Birmingham. It's replacing the Arizona game that we had on the schedule. The Arizona game got pushed back to next year. Illinois is a team that I think lost quite a bit of talent from last year, but still projected probably to be a good team. I love getting these like Midwest games, Midwest teams, the traditional powerhouses or basketball powerhouses that on the schedule. What do you guys think about Illinois? I would let Charles go first since Joey's gone first quite a few times.
Again, another team that's going to be really well coached. Brad Underwood's done a phenomenal job at Illinois. They typically play pretty fast as well, so it should be an exciting game, just back and forth. I do think they've lost talent, but it's a team that is still going to be considered an NCAA tournament team. Probably a team that's no worse than an 8 seed. And of course, if the season goes right for them and they get some big wins in the Big Ten, could maybe find themselves in the 4, 5, 6 range. It's a team too that was in the Elite Eight and also lost to the only team that was in their way was Connecticut. As we know, Connecticut kind of rolled over everybody. But there's a lot of history with this program. Like I said, Underwood's done very well with this team. I think if I remember correctly, during the COVID year when we were a 2 seed, Illinois was a 1 seed on the other side of the bracket and got upset by Loyola Chicago. But a program that's used to winning, being very successful, they won't be intimidated by playing Alabama. They won't be intimidated by playing anybody. So a great opportunity in Birmingham for us to build a winning streak in Birmingham or continue actually a winning streak in Birmingham, which we haven't really been able to say a whole lot of times with Alabama basketball. But should be a fun event. Again, it's the CM Newton Classic, but a great opportunity early on where you're going to get a lot of people in Birmingham to see this team. And if you're a casual Alabama basketball fan that doesn't have season tickets, hopefully this pushes people to go buy some more single game tickets and make the trek to Tuscaloosa for some of these conference games where we will need big crowds and big support.
I think one of the good things about scheduling these tough games like Purdue and Illinois this early in the season is that you're able to catch teams on their back foot, when they're off. I think that applies to Purdue and that, like you said, Charles, with Purdue, they're not necessarily going in a rebuilding year, but they're in a kind of a transforming year. They're kind of evolving how they're going to have to play this year. With Illinois catching them this early, I think they only have 3 returning players from last year. I think they got 6 transfers and 5 incoming freshmen. And so Alabama's kind of going to be able to capitalize on this team is still figuring out, how things are going to work there with the roster they have. So I think that is one thing that Bama has in their favor. Couldn't speak higher of Brad Underwood. I think the guy does a great job there. Illinois is a really good team that year in and year out. I feel like I hear about Illinois more and more every year, and it's because they really are building a good team. But not to repeat too much of Charles said, I just wanted to make that point. I think that's one of the good things about playing this level of talent so early is that a win here against Purdue or against Illinois, while those 2 teams might not be playing their best basketball, those wins look really good when the tournament field is being set in March.
Would be shocked if those games, when you get to the end of March, are not quad 1 games.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, especially since one's on the road and one's a neutral site. Like it would be almost I mean, they would have to be really, really bad in order
Right.
for them not to be a quad one game. Well, and that's such a good point. I didn't even think about that until Charles said it about the Purdue being in the national championship and then Illinois being in the Elite Eight. And then you now have Houston, who was the number one overall or number one seed um, last year in three consecutive games in the Players Era Festival. Um, and this is such a going to be such a controversial like tournament because it's the first NIL style tournament NIL because it can't officially be NIL but um style tournament and you get some really big names really big teams coming in. Texas A&M's on one side, obviously Alabama, Houston, Rutgers, Notre Dame in our pods, and you're opening up with the marquee game, Alabama versus Houston, where Kelvin Sampson, who amazing coach that they're a top three seed. It seems like almost every single year, and a scenario where Alabama's played Houston. What this will be the third time in the last 4 years that Alabama's played Houston, and Nate Oates is 2-0 versus them. What do you guys think about this opening Players Era game?
If you're going to start a new tournament and build it like this, you might as well, I guess, put your best game first and not let people wait around until the weekend or till some of those rivalry games in college football. Um, a lot of transition, a lot of attrition from both these programs since they last played each other. Uh, Houston, there's been kind of a rivalry almost brewing there, especially with how the first game went with J.D. Davidson's clean block. And as clean as that was, of course, Houston had to leave Coleman Coliseum with trash on the floor. But then we made sure to take care of it when we went to the Fertitta Center, Fertitta, whatever. We still won. Um, and so I think it's again another really challenging game. And I think from an Alabama standpoint, and maybe for both programs, I mean, Houston will get to play Notre Dame next, and we'll have to play Rutgers, and I'll wait for my comments about Rutgers in just a little bit. But you're going into a three-game tournament, and this may be the most physical game that you have to play, and you got to hope your body, stays together, and you're able to put together two good additional performances to be able to win your pod and win the tournament. So we haven't had a lot of success in these early season tournaments. I think the last one we won was over a decade ago. We were playing playing up in New York in Madison Square Garden when we beat Oregon State and beat Villanova. The name of that, four-team tournament escapes me right now. But when you're thinking about marquee matchups, Houston's the number 14, going to be considered a top five and probably the number 4 team in the country. And we're expecting to be no worse than the number 3 team in the country. So it is a high profile matchup to get the college basketball season started. And I think, again, that's what they're trying to do with what college basketball is trying to do is have these early games and get the excitement that it's not just something the calendar turns into a new year and then people start paying attention to basketball. So it'll be a phenomenal game. It's a game that, would obviously love to win and continue the winning streak against Houston and the Sampson boys.
Yeah, Houston, they might have lost Jamal Shed, but they're still really a solid team this year. They have LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp's, going to be back. I think they got a Uzan. I'm not sure how you say his last name. Milos, he got him from the portal. He should be a really good, key component to them. You have also, of course, the Rutgers game and what should be an exciting. I know a lot of people aren't necessarily looking forward to the Notre Dame game because it's not exactly a huge marquee matchup, but it'll be fun to play them since I think it's the first time Bama's played them since that round of 64 loss in San Diego, which my plane landed in San Diego, then immediately took off pretty much how quickly we were there. But it'll be fun to play them for the first time since that game that Quinterly got injured in the first half. But that's neither here nor there. This tournament is going to be, I I was jokingly referring to it as just it's more of an experiment than a tournament. I think. Um, Now that being said, regardless of how people think or how controversial this potential setup is, it is still going to be three quality games for Alabama. I already talked about Houston. Rutgers is not a is no slouch. I think this is a decent. They have three returning players, four transfers. With Notre Dame, it's going to be a little bit more interesting because I believe out of their starting five, they only have one player returning. I think they have Shrewsbury coming back, who he averaged 10 points a game last year. But overall, it's going to be you have the marquee matchup in Houston, but then you kind of have that slight dip. Not that that's a bit large dip. It is still going to be a tough 7 game stretch here, but at least you're having that slight dip as we head into the final stretch of those North Carolina and Creighton games that we have coming up after the tournament. But overall, I think this is an interesting opportunity. I think it's really cool to see Bama be a part of this endeavor because I feel like Alabama is kind of left out of a lot of these kind of stuff over the past decade, but that just kind of shows the growth of the program that when they were forming this tournament, Bama was one of the schools that they wanted to include in it.
So
Yeah,
I actually think Rutgers is going to be the hardest game of this 7 game stretch because it is right after playing Houston. So there's no day's rest to get your body right to play what will be a very physical team because that's how Steve Peichel teams are. Christian mentioned about Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper being on Rutgers. It's two guys that were top 5 players in the country. They'll be freshmen, so there'll be some learning going on there, but it'll be an opportunity, obviously, for them to make a name for themselves. And Peichel's team in the past 5 years, three of yeah, excuse me. Yeah, in the past 5 years, he's had 4 of his teams have finished top 20 or better in defense. Last year, his team finished top 5 related with KenPom. Of course, Cliff was a big part of that, but again, they're going to be hard nosed. They're going to be physical. We're going to have just taken body blows from Houston all night because I believe that will be a physical game. I look at the Rutgers game as being the most difficult game on the schedule, both from a physicality and a mental standpoint with what we have just played, and then having to turn around and play Rutgers. I think we should be able to take care of Notre Dame, but just depending on how those first 2 games, I I expect this to be a team that's mature and able to get their mind right before every game, but it's Notre Dame's a team you should be able to roll over, and Shrewsbury's trying to make a name for himself at Notre Dame as he builds that program back. He did a good job at Penn State while he was there. So it's not a game to overlook, but I do think I think the Rutgers game is the toughest game on the schedule, to non-conference schedule, to be completely honest.
Well, if we
yeah,
know Alabama basketball, they'll win the game against Houston, lose to Rutgers, and win the game against Notre Dame. I feel
Yeah.
like they do that every pool tournament. That's what happens.
um, well, and I'm just looking at the schedule now, and I just realized that Rutgers game's at 9 p.m. Central, and then they have to turn around at 12 p.m. the next day to play the Notre Dame game.
No, I think the Notre Dame game is. I think the Rutgers game will be Thanksgiving Eve, and then the Notre Dame game is
Oh,
actually
sorry. No, this says Wednesday to Saturday. I'm
yeah.
sorry. I didn't even see that. I was about to say, like, why? So they're staying out in Vegas for 2 days without playing?
I'm sure they'll hate it. I'm sure they'll have a terrible time out there in Vegas for 2 days.
We get the double dip of a basketball game leading into the Iron Bowl, so that should be a
Well,
fun day.
well, based on how Auburn football looks, you might have Iron Bowl at 11 a.m. on that Saturday. So
That won't be possible, and that's one of the things I do like with this ESPN contract is they already do have those time slots where they've already said Auburn game will be mid-afternoon or an evening game, so we won't have to worry
it's
about.
not going to be in the evening. I can tell you that much.
3:30 or 4 o'clock Iron Bowl.
No, I'm looking forward to it. I always enjoy the feast week as they like to call it. Not just for Alabama basketball, but being able to just sit down and there's a basketball game on your TV at basically all times throughout the day, and it gives you a real good opportunity to look at some teams maybe that you haven't had a chance to look at. because you've been focused, either on football or, your basketball team specifically. So I'm looking forward to that. And then the game I'm looking forward to probably the most out of all of them is the UNC game in the is it the Dean Smith Center? I think that's what it's called. Uh, for people that don't know, my mom's boyfriend is a UNC grad, and so last year I had to give him some crap because we beat him in the Sweet 16. He was not very happy. I think the plan as of right now is that we're both going to go up and go watch the game in Chapel Hill. Sam's cousin graduated from Chapel Hill, so there's a little bit of a family rivalry, if you will, from there. So I'm looking forward to stuffing Hubert Davis in a locker once again. Would be the fifth time in the last 2 years that we've done that. So if you want to know my prediction, you don't have to wait. But what are your guys' thoughts on the UNC game?
Well, it's slowly turning into a rivalry. I mean, not only beating North Carolina like team to team, but also beating them on the recruiting trail as well with Cliff, right? Cliff was between us and North Carolina. So this is we talked earlier about Illinois kind of being a Purdue being a transforming team. North Carolina might be a team that is legitimately taking a rebuilding year a little bit. They lost huge with Cormac Ryan and Pack and I never can pronounce his name. Paxson Wojcik.
Wojcik.
Yeah, Wojcik. They also, of course, lost Baycott. They lost Ingram. They lost Okonkwo. So they lost a lot of really talented players on their team from last year. That being said, it's North Carolina, and it's North Carolina, and you're playing them up in North Carolina as well. So regardless of who they have on their other teams, kind of like playing Alabama football, it doesn't matter who. If they're wearing a white and powder blue jersey, that's something to be concerned about. So they are going to be a talented team, and given the past few years, North Carolina is none too happy with Alabama, so they'll probably be bringing energy to that game. I never thought that Alabama would ever have a regular season game at North Carolina where Alabama had beaten them the past couple of times. So it'll be interesting to watch how this game plays out now that we're finally not playing at a neutral site or in a tournament. We're playing in the opponent's stadium.
As we sit here today on September 23rd, it feels like a game that if you can just weather whatever storm North Carolina throws at you, I agree. It's going to be a raucous crowd because we have eaten their lunch both on the court and off the court as it relates to recruiting and all that. If you can weather the storm and keep it close, I can imagine the anxiety in the Dean Smith Center will just continue to grow and could be a game that you could take late. So it'll be a phenomenal matchup between RJ Davis and Mark Sears. I'm sure that'll be talked about, as these games get closer, about two of the better guards within the country going against each other again. It'll be interesting from a defensive perspective. We went out and really tried to make guys like Elliot Cadeau and Seth Trimble try to make threes, and lo and behold, they made threes. Is that a strategy that we use again, or have we grown so much on the defensive side that we can kind of play a little bit more just regular defense, guard your man, not try to get cute or anything like that. So that'll be interesting to watch. The SEC Challenge last year, Tennessee went into Chapel Hill, and I think they made it somewhat close at the end. And I mean, close of just getting it under double digits, but I feel like the final score was 101-92. North Carolina to put 101 points up against, any Tennessee defense, because that's what Tennessee is built off of, was really impressive. I do think it was a game.
Dang good Tennessee team too.
Yeah. And I do think it was a game that North Carolina kind of got a lot of free passes to the free throw line as well. That's to be expected just in college basketball in general. But, the times and the dates came out for both these games. This is a lead in to or not a lead in, it's a double header, our game, and then Auburn Duke following that. And, if you're just a fan of basketball within the state of Alabama, you're really getting to see what both of these programs are able to do against some of the royalty of college basketball with North Carolina and Duke. So uh, hopefully we take care of business. Hopefully, for one game, Duke takes care of business as well. And it's a phenomenal night for Alabama basketball fans.
I
I
think
can
the
see that.
crazy thing about that is Auburn's playing at Duke. So they're playing like 5 miles away from each other, Auburn and Alabama, at basically the same time. Like the amount of, I think, Alabama, state of Alabama support that's going to be in, the research triangle of Raleigh slash Durham slash Chapel Hill, however you want to, classify it, is going to be insane. Um, but I'm looking forward to that so much. I wish we would have played Duke because I would have loved to gone to Cameron Indoor. Because I've seen it empty. You're able to walk through, with it empty, but I've never been in a game. But I'm excited to get to the Dean Smith Center.
Flights from Birmingham to North Carolina not going to be cheap that week. It's for, and also I can see the blue blood versus new blood J&J apparel shirts now, for that game.
We'll be cooking some stuff up. Well, I will say if you are coming from Alabama, it's only like a 9-hour drive. It probably would
That's
be
fair.
cheaper for you to just drive, from Tuscaloosa to Chapel Hill. Um, and you could probably either stop in Atlanta or Charlotte if you really wanted to. Um, and then moving from there to the biggest rival, Alabama's biggest rival, on my wife's birthday, which if you guys haven't seen that schedule for the December 14th, it's loaded.
Mm.
December 14th basketball. And of course, it's my wife's birthday, so I won't be able to watch very much of it. So sorry. I think Alabama's going to get some revenge here. I think the revenge is probably on their mind. Latrell Wrightsell, from Omaha, Nebraska. I don't think he played particularly well last season, against Creighton. A real opportunity to kind of, get him back in Tuscaloosa. And you have a situation where when Alabama played Creighton, they just kind of got beat up on the interior, couldn't really stop anything. Um, just very interested to see how much similar to the North Carolina game, similar to the Houston game, like we talked about Purdue, how much improvement this Alabama team is going to have. And this is the, I guess, final stretch or the final game of this 7-game stretch where at this point, if you're not Harden, then, I wouldn't expect a good season, which I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying, like, after this 7-game stretch, if you're not like, okay, this is what we need to fix, then there's some major problems. What are your thoughts on our most hated rival, Creighton?
I think prior to last season, they lost a lot of their key players, but they were able to still make a deep NCAA tournament run. It's kind of the same thing for them this year, but they do have some promising additions. They have a solid defense led by Kalkbrenner. This is a really, really solid Creighton team. And if, Greg McDermott, like I said, was able to make a lot with a little last year, and they have more than they did last year this season. So, it's the bitter rivalry is going to continue to get even more bitter. But I still am I'm always excited to see Creighton on the schedule just because of all the energy that Bama fans put into it, and it's no different this year. I think it'll you have that rivalry there, but at the same time, it is a good kind of palate cleanser after the Vegas trip, so in North Carolina. So I'm looking forward to that Creighton game as it kind of leads into kind of now this descending a little bit before we ramp it back up for conference play.
So a couple things real quick. this will be the end of the stretch where you play Purdue, and I'm using some of ESPN's way too early top 25 and bracketology. Purdue, 16 in the country. Illinois, considered a seven seed in the NCAA tournament. Houston, number 4 in the country. Rutgers, 25. Notre Dame, trying to prove something. North Carolina, 10. And then you finish it off with number 15, Creighton. Just a incredible stretch, and kind of strange too that we'll have these first 3 games to start the year with UNC Asheville, Arkansas State, McNeese State, and then the next time you have a home game in Coleman Coliseum is a month later. A long time in between games in Coleman, so that's pretty unique. But also love that we're bringing a big opponent into Coleman, and it's not just a neutral site game as well, which I know we'll get with Purdue next year. Arizona, obviously, being in Birmingham, and then probably playing Illinois up in Chicago. I can imagine if there's a game that Alabama basketball fans want out of these 7 games, it's this Creighton game. I expect it to be loud. I'll go ahead and mark it down as a win because it's Sam's birthday. Sounds like she won't be in the house, so everything will be fine. Like everything is coming together for a huge Creighton win, for some redemption when Trevor Relaford got fouled almost a decade ago. It will be. It will not reach what last year's Alabama-Tennessee game was as far as college game day and just what that environment was. But those people who are dying for a win against Creighton and view this as our biggest rivalry, I understand it. I think they will come out in full force, and hopefully this will be a great cap to what is hopefully a successful stretch that, as you said, hardens this team, gets them ready for conference play, and ultimately gets them ready for the NCAA tournament.
So these final 3 games are, I wouldn't say gimme games, but that's kind of basically what they are. They're bye games, I guess is what you would call them. And we don't really have to deep dive into those. It's North Dakota, Kent State, South Dakota State. But I do want to touch on one game, and that's the North Dakota game. This is one that I talked about again on the Hoop Southbound podcast last week that I'm probably looking forward to the most, not because of the game, but because of the fact that the staff and Coach Ballman, who is in charge of putting the schedule together, went out of their way to make sure that Grant Nelson could get a home game for his final season in college basketball. For those of you that don't know, Grant Nelson's from Devil's Fork, North Dakota, and came from North Dakota State. And so some people might ask, oh, well, why didn't they just schedule North Dakota State? Well, North Dakota is closer to his hometown than North Dakota State. So they intentionally scheduled this game at North Dakota so that Grant's family could come see him in his final season in college basketball. And Alabama staff has had a tendency to do that in the past. You saw it last year with Purdue. That was supposed to be for Charles Bediako. Obviously ended up going to the NBA. I don't know if you really count the Creighton game as, for Latrell Wrightsell because they I think scheduled that before we got Latrell. But then you're playing games in Huntsville for Mark Sears in the exhibition game. You played up. Did we play up in New Jersey last year for Estrada?
Can't remember. I'll look that up real quick.
No, it wasn't. I forget. We played someone, and it escapes me. But either way, talk about kind of like what this staff kind of does, where you kind of give these seniors a send off of sorts, or a farewell tour.
I mean, I think first of all, I hope nobody gets frostbite while they're up there. We still have a whole season left to go after that. But I think it's a great experience for a lot of these guys too that, yeah, we're doing it for Grant, but I've never been to North Dakota. I imagine a lot of us have never been to North Dakota. So it'll probably be unique experience for a lot of these players just to go somewhere else in the country. I hope this is a game that ESPN or somebody picks up and allows North Dakota to have that exposure too. Of course, it'll be a big game, but I think it just gets amplified more when you do get somebody like an ESPN or a Fox that's going to come in there and televise it and not just put it on like the SEC network or an ESPNU, but makes it an ESPN or an ESPN2 game. I agree. I think as far as just character building for the program, and I think just cohesiveness from the team, that chemistry we talk about, this is an opportunity for Grant to, showcase a lot of, not even though, as you mentioned, he's from Devil's Lake, it's not his hometown, but just his home state. And hopefully, it's a bonding experience as well for a lot of these guys too. So I hope it's a great experience for the guys. I don't expect it to be so much of a distraction, I guess, being up there that it would cause us to play poorly. And I think too, it's great that we're doing something like this for a program like a North Dakota. I mean, I know when we had Coach Johnson, we went over to Stephen F. Austin and played it as well in a home and home series. And I think some of that, there is a uniqueness with college basketball where you're not going to do that in football, where we bring in some of these teams like a Mercer or a Chattanooga and Austin Peay. We're never going to go play at their home, arenas, but it's a way to kind of, help build their basketball programs, because I expect a night like this to be a big moneymaker for North Dakota. They're going to have, their seats, every seat's going to be sold out. Their concession stands are going to be packed. So I think it's great. That's something that, Oates and Ballman are doing. And of course, I hope it's a night that is a good result for the team as well.
I think on top of that, it's a sign of just how strong the culture is within the program. The fact that the coaches are so dedicated to getting these games scheduled. And so not only is that a reflection of the team's culture and the program's culture, but it's also a solid recruiting tool, because when you're wanting to recruit guys from the portal or recruit high schoolers, you can point to these kind of games as an examples of how much the coaching staff and the program cares about its players. So I think it's terrific. I'm looking forward to this game as well. It's definitely my favorite of these final three games. I'm really looking forward to watching it. If it wasn't so difficult to try to get up to North Dakota, I'd probably try to figure out a way to get up there. But regardless, it is going to be a quite a special game, and a really good kind of. It's not a period, because it's not the end of non-conference play, but it's a good game to begin that winding down process as you ramp up for SEC play.
Would you put your Final Four scarf to use going up there?
I'd probably put that one over another scarf. I think that one might be a little bit too thin.
Well, so as we kind of conclude here, I want to talk about expectations. And for those of you that listen to the spaces and listen to these podcasts, expectations are something that I always try to harp on and talk about, every episode, just and the main reason for that is level setting. When like last season, for example, right? Many people called that a disappointing season leading up into the NCAA tournament. When, if you go back to our podcast in January or go back to the spaces in January or December, we said, what was it, like a 13-5 record in the SEC would be good. And I believe we got a 13-5 record in the SEC, but people were calling it a disappointing season because of the way the season finished. So before we get into the non-conference, slate, what would your expectations, let's say your ceiling, floor, and kind of like your reasonable, what do you think is going to happen as far as a record is concerned, going into conference play?
See, there's 13 games. I think ceiling, I'd probably go 11-2. I think you're gonna drop one that you shouldn't drop. I feel like that's always going to be the case. And then you're gonna drop one that you deserve to, not that you deserve to lose, but you're gonna drop a game to a quality opponent. I think Bama's gonna win that Houston game. But I do think, like you were talking about earlier, Charles, I think Rutgers or potentially potentially Illinois can sneak up on Alabama. I hope that's not the case, especially with Illinois. I'd love to see Alabama beat Illinois in Birmingham, but I think I think those games have a potential to sneak up, especially Illinois being sandwiched in between Purdue and Houston. And hopefully the players aren't already looking forward towards Las Vegas. And like I said, I think there's one game, but really the absolute ceiling is 12-1. I think they're going to lose one game, but realistically, I think 11-2 floor. Uh, floor, you're probably looking at 8-5. Um, I think if Alabama were to lose to Houston, I think they actually have a better chance against Rutgers. I think they can beat Purdue, they can beat Illinois, but over the course of that, I would probably have 8-5 as my floor because they're going to win some big games in that 7-game stretch. They're not going to lose all 7. So I think that's probably their floor right there.
I was going to say for a floor, probably 9-4. 9-4, I'm not concerned. Like we talked about, there's a lot of quality opponents on the schedule. So if you have some games that are close and ball just doesn't bounce your way, and that happens 4 times, you shake it off, you get ready for conference play, you do what you did last year as far as taking care of the SEC. Ceiling, look, I think 13-0 is a possibility. I'm not going to
put possibility.
Yeah, I'm not going to put it in the realistic category, but what I feel like with this team of what we expect, the defense is going to be much better. Now we still need to see what this team is like from a shooting perspective. You're coming off one of the best seasons as it relates to offense in Alabama basketball history. Do we have the shooters this year like we did last year? Time will tell. I think where even if we don't have the shooters that we did last year, or maybe aren't able to space the floor as much because you have somebody like a Cliff playing the 5 more minutes, I think Cliff makes up for that with offensive rebounds, putbacks, things like that. And then there's still the possibility that where you don't have Grant necessarily out on the perimeter, whether it's at a 5 or a 4 position, you can let him go to work a little bit more on the block like we saw him do, towards the end of last year. He did take it a little bit more, from the wing, but he was playing in a 5 role where I feel like if you have him as a 4, he might have some mismatches playing the 4 where it's better to post him up. So I think from an offensive standpoint, we were talking before we started that there was a question out there. Can Alabama have an elite offense with Cliff Amorie? Absolutely. I think Amorie is just a piece that just adds into the offense that we've seen with Nick Pringle and Bediako and guys like that. What I think is going to be, important from this team, and we talked about this with Coach Pannone, last year's team was so good at taking care of the basketball. So when I think about expectation or goals, especially in those first 3 games, as far as what I want to see from this team, I want to see them keep the turnovers under 15 a game. I'd like to see it more in the 10 to 12, which is what they did a lot of times last year. And with this team, if you're able to do that, you've got the shooters that they're going to take advantage of those extra possessions that you're not giving to the other team. And then from a defensive perspective with Coach Adams, I am very interested to see, do we pressure a little bit more, or because what we have with Cliff as a rim protector and feeling like we can stay in front of our guys, do we try to limit teams to one shot, collect the defensive rebound, get it out, and go? So back to the original question, I think 13-0 is a possibility. I think 11-2 is more realistic. If this team is 9-4 going into conference play, I'm not pulling my hair out. I'm not, we're not going to sit here saying this team doesn't have a chance. You're playing good competition. Things are going to happen. You're going to learn from this, and you're going to get ready for conference play.
And I realized, Christian, that I didn't give my what I think is actually going to happen. Just real quick, I think Bama I think it'll probably be 10-3 heading into conference play, and I will not be upset at all with 10-3 after that stretch. But that's realistically either 9-4 or 10-3 is what I think is probably going to happen over that.
Well, and when we head into conference play too, our first conference game, it is at home, but it's against Oklahoma, which,
Hmm.
being a new conference opponent, it's almost still feels like a non-conference game. You're not going to have, the game plans that you can pull out from last year, like you will with the Lamont Paris at South Carolina or some of the new coaches. So that will still be a fairly new game, new scouting reports and things like that. As far as just the system and some of those things that Oklahoma does. So there's a little bit, in my opinion, uniqueness to Alabama's schedule too, that yes, you're starting conference play, but you're starting conference play with a program that has never been a conference opponent before as well. So it almost, in a way, sometimes feels like the non-conference schedule is actually 14 games, not just the 13 games.
I can't tell you how many times I've scrolled down that schedule and seen Oklahoma and just lumped it in with the non-conference games. Ugh.
Well, and I'll say this: my concern with this team going into the year is going to be the ball handling. You lose Aaron Estrada, who at times last year, and especially in the tournament run, was a primary ball handler for Alabama, and you replace that with Aiden Holloway, who I think can be that point guard, but how effective is he going to be offensively? You saw last year at Auburn, he wasn't super effective. Obviously, it's a different system, a little bit more open. Maybe he flourishes a little bit better. Then you have a freshman in LeBaron Filan. We haven't seen him in competition yet. So what does that look like? And then you have Chris Youngblood. And I think those four guys are going to be your four primary ball handlers. Obviously, like Grant will be able to take it up the court at times. I expect like Darian Reed would be able to take it up the court, things of that nature, but that's not going to be the norm, right? So when Alabama needs a bucket and needs to get to the paint, you had Aaron Estrada that would be able to do that effectively. Mark Sears could do that because there was the shooting on the wings was so effective. So for this team, that's my main concern is who's going to step up and be that ball handler alongside Mark Sears, because Mark is so effective off ball that it just opens up the floor a little bit better for Alabama. I'm not saying that Mark's not going to be the primary point guard or whatever. I'm just saying that Mark in an off ball situation is extremely effective, and it's something that we used a lot last season. As far as my floor is concerned, 8-5 would probably be my floor. We've seen a tendency for even the really good Alabama teams to drop, 4 or 5 games. Even in the Herb Jones Sweet 16 year, I think they were 6-5, heading into heading after the Western Kentucky game. The Brandon Miller team, I believe, had lost, what was it, like 3 games? They were like 4-3 or something like that in conference play, and just went on that crazy run where they destroyed everybody. So there is a tendency there just based off the schedule. So my floor would probably be 8-5. Ceilings probably 12-1. I don't think that this team gets out without a loss on the non-conference slate. I like, if they do, then is an undefeated season on the table, because that's basically what I would be feeling if we go 13-0 with that schedule. And then my realistic expectation is probably 9-4, 10-3, right in there. It would be my non-conference. And you guys know that have listened. Charles is a little bit more optimistic than myself and Joey. So,
which is a change for me.
Yeah. Well, someone's got to be optimistic. We can't all be negative.
I'm drinking the Crimson Kool-Aid that Coach Oates keeps pouring.
But I'll say this, and we'll wrap it up. We appreciate you guys listening in the off season. Again, want to thank Coach Murphy, Coach Pannone, and then LeBaron for hopping on a podcast. Maybe we'll get another player on before the season. If you do have an opportunity, go to J&J. I think this week on Thursday they're doing a meet and greet with Latrell Reitzel, and I think they have 2 more as well that will be announced. And so go shop at J&J. It's on Thursday, I think at 5. And you have an opportunity to go meet Latrell. I would assume Cliff would be one of the guys that I don't think we met. They haven't done Cliff yet, right? No, they did Youngblood. They did Youngblood and Nelson. That's right. I would assume Cliff would be one of them. Maybe some of the freshmen. But go to J&J. And then as far as our schedule is concerned, maybe we do a preseason space after one of the exhibition games. Just kind of talk about what people saw, different things like that. And we'll have I think we'll do like the first like podcast that we're probably going to release is probably that UNC Asheville preview. And we'll probably do it like not directly before the UNC Asheville game, but like a week before, and kind of just previewing what we saw or recapping what we saw in the exhibition games, and then kind of our thoughts on UNC Asheville. So Joey, Charles, you guys got any more thoughts?
No, it's good to be back. We are so back.
No, just ready to get things tipped off. Excited for, what is it, November 4th? Yeah, November 4th to get here. Yeah, just what Coach Oates said, getting ready for a special season.
Well, with that, guys, this will be the first, I guess, Roll Tide to end the podcast of the new season. So Roll Tide, and we'll talk again soon.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.